Christmas dinner at my in-laws is always a performance. The house smells like pine needles and roasting turkey. The lights on the tree are twinkling, but underneath all the forced festive cheer, there's always a low-grade tension. And the source of that tension almost always is my brother-in-law, Julian. Julian is an expert in everything, but his grand passion, his magnum opus of condescension, is wine. He's not a real sommelier, of course. He just reads a lot of blogs and uses the word terroir in casual conversation. Every year he puts on a show, swirling his glass so aggressively you'd think he was trying to start a small whirlpool, sniffing it with a pained intellectual expression, and making pronouncements like, "ah, yes." The tannins on this are simply pugnacious. This year I had brought a bottle of wine. It was nothing fancy, just a simple Cabernet Sauvignon that I genuinely liked. It was about $15, smooth, and I thought it would go nicely with the roast beef. A perfectly decent, modest contribution to the family meal. That was my first mistake. We were all sitting at the table, and Julian, of course, was inspecting every bottle that had been opened. He picked up mine. He didn't just pick it up. He held it by the neck, away from his body, as if it were contaminated. He squinted at the label, a slow, theatrical smirk spreading across his face. "Oh, bless," he announced to the entire table, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. "Someone brought a supermarket wine. How quaint!" A few people gave an awkward little chuckle. I felt a hot flush creep up my neck. He wasn't done. He held the bottle up for everyone to see, a prosecutor presenting evidence. "Now, this is a perfect example of what we call a commercially minded vintage," he began, launching into an unsolicited lecture. "There's no soul, no sense of place. It's just fermented grape juice designed to be inoffensive, palatable for the masses." He looked directly at me and smiled a thin, pitying smile. "It's drinkable, I suppose, if you enjoy that sort of thing." The table went silent. Every eye was on me. I just sat there, my fork suddenly feeling very heavy in my hand, feeling small, foolish, and utterly humiliated. He hadn't just insulted my wine. He'd insulted my taste, my judgment, my very existence as a person who was clearly not as sophisticated as he was. All over a $15 bottle of wine I just wanted to share with my family. The rest of the dinner was a blur of forced smiles and awkward silence. But the real conversation, the one that truly started everything, happened on the silent drive home. The drive home was silent. Not a comfortable silence, but a loud, ringing one, thick with everything that hadn't been said at the dinner table. My wife, Sarah, Julian's sister, just stared out the passenger window, watching the Christmas lights of our neighborhood blur past. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white, replaying the scene in my head over and over. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "I can't believe him," I said, my voice low and tight. "In front of everyone. In front of your parents. Who does that?" Sarah sighed, a long, weary sound. "Oh, you know Julian," she said, her voice frustratingly calm. "That's just how he is. You can't take it personally." "Not take it personally?" I shot back, my voice rising. "He called me a tasteless moron in front of our entire family, Sarah. How am I not supposed to take that personally?" "He didn't call you a moron," she said, turning to look at me, her expression one of mild annoyance. "He was just talking about the wine. He's passionate about it, that's all. He doesn't mean it maliciously. He gets carried away, passionate." That was the word she always used. It was the family-approved excuse for Julian's insufferable arrogance. He wasn't a condescending jerk. He was passionate. And in that moment, hearing that word, I felt a profound sense of being alone. My own wife, the person who was supposed to be in my corner, was making excuses for the man who had just publicly humiliated me. She was so conditioned to her brother's behavior, so used to managing his ego, that she couldn't even see how insulting he'd been. I felt completely, utterly invalidated. I didn't say another word for the rest of the drive. There was no point. Later that night, I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, the anger from dinner still churning in my stomach. Julian's smug, pitying smile was burned into my brain. "Palatable for the masses." The words echoed in my head. He was so sure of himself. So absolutely, unshakably certain of his own superior knowledge. And then, a thought. A small, dangerous spark in the darkness of my anger. A thought so simple and yet so brilliant, it made me sit up in bed. What if he's faking it? What if underneath all the jargon and the performative sniffing? What if he can't actually tell the difference? The next day, the anger had cooled. It had settled into something colder, quieter, and far more dangerous. a plan. I didn't want to get into a shouting match with Julian. I didn't want an apology. I wanted to dismantle him, to take his entire identity as a connoisseur, this pillar of arrogance he had built his personality on, and turn it to dust. So I started my research. I spent hours, days falling down the rabbit hole of the fine wine world. I wasn't learning to become a wine expert. I was learning to become a counterfeiter. I lurked on Wine-Snob forums, absorbing their ridiculous vocabulary. I learned the difference between jammy and leathery, between an elegant finish and a robust mouthfeel. I was learning to speak the enemy's language. My goal was to find the perfect bottle. Not just an expensive wine, but a legendary one. A wine with a story. A white whale, as they called it, that someone like Julian would know of but could only ever dream of tasting. I started searching Julian's own digital footprint. He had a small, pretentious blog, of course, called The Noble Grape. I scrolled through years of his self-important posts until I found it. A post from 3 years ago titled, The 5 Vintages I Would Sell My Soul to Taste. And there, at number 1 was my holy grail. The Chateau Beaumont, 1998. According to Julian's own gushing prose, it was a mythical wine from a tiny, forgotten vineyard in Bordeaux that had supposedly produced one perfect, miraculous vintage before being wiped out by a fire. Only a few hundred bottles were ever made. It was, in his words, liquid history, a ghost of a perfect summer. It was his ultimate dream wine, and it was the perfect weapon. My research became an obsession. I wasn't just planning a prank anymore. I was a man on a mission. I found high-resolution photos of the Chateau Beaumont's label online. I read every tasting note I could find, memorizing the absurd descriptions. A nose of blackcurrant, cedar, and damp earth, a palate of dark chocolate and worn leather, a finish that lasts for an eternity. I created a dossier, a complete intelligence file on a bottle of wine. I knew the language. I had my target. Now, all I needed were the tools to build the perfect Trojan horse. The next phase of the operation felt like a scene out of a heist movie. My first stop was the supermarket, the very scene of the crime. I walked down the wine aisle past all the decent, respectable $15 bottles and went straight to the bottom shelf. I was looking for the cheapest, most offensively generic red wine I could find. I settled on something called Vintner's Reserve Cabernet Sauvignon. The label had a picture of a cartoonish vineyard on it. It cost $9.99. I bought 3 bottles just in case of accidents. Next, I went online. I found a freelance graphic designer who specialized in custom labels for home brewers and small businesses. I sent him the high-resolution photo of the Chateau Beaumont 1998 label I'd found. "Hi there," I wrote in the email. "I'm working on a short film, a parody of a stuffy wine documentary. Could you replicate this label for me as a prop? The more authentic looking, the better." He wrote back an hour later. "No problem. That'll be $50. It was the best $50 I'd ever spent. The labels arrived a week later and they were perfect. The texture of the paper, the font, the slightly faded colors, it was a work of art. Now came the real work, the forgery. I spent an entire Saturday in my garage, transforming my $9.99 bottle of Plonk into a priceless antique. I carefully steamed off the cartoon vineyard label. I brewed a cup of strong black tea and used a cotton ball to delicately stain the new label, giving it a yellowed, aged patina. I took a piece of fine grit sandpaper and gently scuffed the glass of the bottle, creating the illusion of decades of wear and tear in some dusty French cellar. The final touch was the cork. I replaced the cheap composite cork with a real one, and then, using a red candle, I carefully dripped wax over the top, creating a thick, messy, and utterly convincing old-world seal. When I was done, I held it up to the light. I placed it next to a photo of the real thing on my laptop. It was indistinguishable. It was a masterpiece of deception. To any normal person, to any casual observer, this bottle looked like an impossibly rare, priceless artifact. I had built the perfect trap. Now all I needed was the perfect occasion to spring it. I didn't have to wait long. A few weeks after Christmas, an email landed in my inbox. The subject line was so perfectly, quintessentially Julian that I almost laughed out loud. It read, "An invitation to Julian's 35th birthday, a celebration of viniculture." Of course. It wouldn't just be a birthday party. It would be a celebration of viniculture. I opened the email. It was a formal digital invitation with a picture of a vineyard at sunset. The dress code was cocktail attire, and at the bottom, in a tasteful italicized font, was a small note. Gifts are not necessary, but if you wish, you are welcome to bring a bottle worthy of discussion. A bottle worthy of discussion. The stage was being set. It was too perfect. But if I had any lingering doubts, any small nagging voice in my head telling me this was a petty, terrible idea, Julian himself silenced it a few days later. A text from him popped up on my phone. "Hey man," it read. "Saw you RSVP'd. Looking forward to seeing you." Then the follow-up. "And seriously, don't feel pressured to bring anything this time. We'll have plenty of actual good wine here for you to try. No need to stop at the supermarket on the way, haha. That was it. That little text, that final, condescending, backhanded jab. It solidified my resolve into something unbreakable. Any flicker of doubt was extinguished, replaced by a cold, righteous certainty. This wasn't just about embarrassing him anymore. This was about teaching him a lesson. A lesson in humility, served at room temperature. I waited an hour, letting my anger cool into a calm, focused sense of purpose. Then, I texted him back. My reply was simple, cordial, and filled with a delicious secret promise of the chaos to come. "Can't wait," I wrote. "And don't worry, I wouldn't dream of showing up empty-handed. I have something special I've been saving just for the occasion." Of course, before I could go through with it, there was one person I had to tell, and I knew she wasn't going to take it well. The night before the party, I retrieved the bottle from its hiding place in the back of my closet. I gave it one last polish with a soft cloth. It looked perfect. Magnificent, even. Sarah came into the bedroom as I was admiring my handiwork. "What's that?" she asked, a curious smile on her face. "Is that what you're bringing to Julian's party?" I held it out for her to see. "This," I said, a slow, triumphant grin spreading across my face, "is a $9.99 bottle of Vintner's Reserve Cabernet Sauvignon, disguised as a priceless, legendary vintage. And tomorrow night I am going to watch your brother praise its sublime terroir, and then I am going to show him the receipt." Her smile vanished. The color drained from her face. You can't be serious," she stammered, her eyes wide with a look of pure horror. That's not funny." "That's cruel, is it?" I asked, my voice calm. "Is it more cruel than him humiliating me in front of our entire family at Christmas dinner?" "That was different," she insisted, her voice rising with agitation. "He was just being him. This is a calculated plan to embarrass him in front of all of his friends."
"It will break his heart."
"It'll cause a huge fight. It could cause a permanent rift in the family." "Please," she begged, her voice softening. "Please don't do this." I just shook my head. "Sarah, I have listened to your brother pontificate and condescend for years. I have listened to you make excuses for him for years. I am done. This isn't just petty revenge. This is a lesson. A necessary ego correction." She just stared at me, her eyes pleading. She knew I was right, but the thought of the inevitable conflict, the sheer explosive drama of it all, terrified her. I walked over and put my hands on her shoulders, my expression firm but not unkind. "I am doing this," I said, my voice low and steady, leaving no room for argument. "I am not asking for your approval. You don't have to like it, but I need to know right now that you won't expose it, that you won't say anything tomorrow night." She looked down, conflicted. I could see the war going on in her head, loyalty to her brother versus loyalty to her husband. After a long, tense silence, she finally gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Okay," she whispered, her voice full of resignation. "Okay, I won't say anything." She was clearly distressed. But I had her word. And that was all I needed. The Trojan horse was ready to be delivered. Julian's apartment was exactly as pretentious as you'd expect. Minimalist furniture, abstract art on the walls that probably cost more than my car, and soft, instrumental jazz murmuring from hidden speakers. It was filled with people who all looked exactly like Julian. Men in sharp blazers, women in elegant dresses, all holding wine glasses and speaking in hushed, serious tones. Sarah was a nervous wreck, clutching my arm so tightly I thought she might cut off my circulation. I, on the other hand, was an oasis of calm. I was ready. We found Julian holding court by a large charcuterie board. "Happy birthday, man," I said, handing him a simple, unassuming gift bag. "Hey, thanks for coming," he said, his eyes already flicking past me to greet someone more important. He took the bag, his movements casual, dismissive. He reached in and pulled out the bottle. His eyes grazed the label for a split second, a look of polite indifference on his face. He was about to put it down on the table with the other, lesser offerings. But then something registered. His eyes snapped back to the label. His body went rigid. He did a comical, almost cartoonish double-take, his jaw going slack. He lifted the bottle closer to his face, his eyes wide with disbelief. He turned it over in his hands, tracing the tea-stained, artfully scuffed label with a trembling finger. And then I watched his face transform. The sequence of emotions was a sight to behold. First, pure, unadulterated shock, then a slow, dawning wave of reverent awe, and finally, as he looked up at me, his face settled into an expression of pure, triumphant smugness. The kind of look that said, "My idiot brother-in-law has finally, after all these years, stumbled into a masterpiece by sheer dumb luck." "No. Way," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. He held the bottle up to the light, cradling it in his hands as if it were the Holy Grail. I don't believe it. The Chateau Beaumont. The 98. He looked at me, his eyes shining. Where did you get this? I have my sources, I said with a mysterious, knowing smile. He didn't need any more than that. His ego filled in the rest. He immediately turned to address the room, holding the bottle aloft like a king holding a scepter. Everyone, a change of plans, he announced, his voice booming with excitement. You will not believe what my brother-in-law has managed to find. Forget the Pinot Noir I had planned. The tasting for tonight is officially upgraded. The bait was taken. The trap was set. All I had to do now was watch as he put on the performance of a lifetime. What followed was a masterclass in performative snobbery. Julian gathered everyone in a circle, placing the bottle on the table with the reverence of a priest placing a holy relic on an altar. Now, he said, his voice hushed and serious, opening a bottle of this age is a delicate procedure. He produced a fancy, complicated-looking corkscrew. You see, the cork will be incredibly fragile. You have to be firm but gentle. You have to persuade it. He made a great show of the process, grunting softly with effort, his brow furrowed in concentration. When the cheap factory-made cork finally came out with a pathetic little squeak, he held it up for inspection. Remarkable integrity for its age, he declared. He then proceeded to pour a tiny thimble-sized amount into about a dozen glasses, instructing everyone as he went. Now a vintage of this caliber needs to breathe. Don't rush it. Give it a gentle swirl. Not too aggressive, just awaken it. I watched, a silent observer in the back of the room, as a dozen people in cocktail attire solemnly swirled $9.99 Vintner's Reserve in their glasses. It was the most surreal thing I had ever seen. Finally, the moment of truth. Julian lifted his glass to his lips. He took a small, thoughtful sip. His eyes fluttered shut. He held the wine in his mouth for a long, pregnant pause, a look of ecstatic concentration on his face. The room was dead silent, everyone watching, waiting for the verdict from their infallible leader. He swallowed. A slow, beatific smile spread across his face. Incredible, he breathed, his voice full of a soft, theatrical awe. Just incredible. You can taste the history. He took another deeper sip. The nose it's exactly as the legends say. Notes of blackcurrant, worn leather, a hint of cedar. My God. He swished the wine in his mouth again. And the tannins. They're simply divine. So structured yet so soft. That was the signal. The floodgates were open. His friends, none of whom wanted to be the one to admit they couldn't taste the history, all rushed to chime in. Oh yes, said a man in a bow tie. A truly robust mouthfeel. The finish is just sublime, added a woman with a pearl necklace. It just goes on and on. It was a symphony of nonsense. A cascade of ridiculous empty descriptors, all in praise of a bottle of wine that had been sitting on the bottom shelf of a supermarket a month ago. Julian was beaming, basking in the glow of his own perceived genius. The ultimate connoisseur who had recognized a masterpiece. He was so caught up in his own performance, so blinded by his own arrogance, that he did something that gave me the perfect final opening. He decided to propose a toast. After everyone had offered their own absurd praise for the wine, Julian, glowing with the self-satisfaction of a man who had just discovered a new planet, raised his glass. The soft jazz music seemed to dip in volume as if on cue. If I could have everyone's attention, he announced, his voice smooth and commanding. "I'd like to propose a toast." He turned, his gaze falling on me where I stood in the corner of the room. He gave me a magnanimous, patronizing smile. "I'd like to propose a toast," he repeated, "to my brother-in-law. For years, I have tried to educate his palate, to elevate his understanding of the finer things." A few of his friends chuckled knowingly. I could feel Sarah tense up beside me. "And tonight," he continued, holding his glass a little higher, "I think we can all agree that he has finally learned the lesson. He has shown that he can, in fact, recognize true quality. It seems he's finally taken my lessons to heart." He looked directly at me, a smug, triumphant twinkle in his eye. "So I'd like to raise a glass. To good taste. To good taste." The room echoed, and everyone took a reverent sip of their cheap wine. I just smiled. A calm, serene, and deeply dangerous smile. It was perfect. He hadn't just taken the bait. He had gift-wrapped the entire revenge for me and tied it with a bow. As the chatter in the room started to pick back up, I took a small step forward, clearing my throat. Julian and his guests were starting to move on, but I remained standing, a silent, unmoving presence until the room quieted down again, their eyes turning to me with curiosity. "If I could just say a few words as well," I said, my voice perfectly calm and clear, cutting through the last of the murmurs. On the subject of good taste, all eyes were on me. Julian was still smiling, assuming I was about to give him a heartfelt, validating thank you speech. "I just want to say," I began, my voice even and pleasant, "that I'm so glad you all enjoyed the Chateau Beaumont. It really is a wine with a fascinating story." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. "Especially," I added, "its price point." A few people chuckled, assuming I was making a joke about how expensive it must have been. I turned my attention directly to Julian, who was still beaming at me, the proud teacher watching his star pupil. "Julian," I said, making direct eye contact, "you were right. The notes of worn leather, the sublime finish, it's all there. But what I find most remarkable about this wine..." I paused again, a long, dramatic beat of silence. I slowly, deliberately reached into the inside pocket of my blazer. Everyone watched, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and confusion. I pulled out a small, crumpled and folded piece of paper. "A grocery store receipt? Is that it can achieve all of that complexity," I continued, my voice never wavering, "for a grand total of $9.99. As I spoke the final words, I unfolded the receipt and placed it gently, and with a quiet finality, right in the center of the charcuterie board for everyone to see. The silence that followed was the most satisfying sound I have ever heard in my entire life. You could have heard a pin drop. For a full 5 seconds, the only sound was the soft jazz still murmuring from the hidden speakers. Julian's friends, frozen in place, just stared. They stared at the flimsy receipt lying next to a slice of prosciutto. They stared into their glasses, as if the wine had suddenly turned to poison. And then, slowly, every single eye in the room turned to Julian. His face was a blank mask of confusion. He hadn't processed it yet. He was still trying to understand the words I had just said, and then, from the back of the room, someone snorted. A loud, sharp, and utterly involuntary bark of laughter. It was the man in the bow tie, the one who had praised the wine's robust mouthfeel. He slapped a hand over his mouth, his eyes wide with horror and amusement, but it was too late. The dam was broken. A few other people started to giggle, trying and failing to hide their smirks behind their hands. That's when Julian finally understood. The color of his face shifted through a series of shades I had never seen on a human being before. It went from pale confusion to a blotchy, angry red, and finally settled on a deep, terrifying shade of purple. He lunged for the table and snatched the receipt, his hands trembling with a rage so intense it was almost comical. "You're lying!" he sputtered, his voice a choked, strangled squeak. "This is a joke. A stupid, pathetic joke." I didn't even raise my voice. I just looked at him, my expression one of calm, detached pity. "It's not a joke, Julian," I said, my voice carrying easily through the now silent room. "The bottle is right there, go on." "Peel off the label," I glued on. "I'm sure the original Vintner's Reserve label is right underneath." That was it. The checkmate. The final, undeniable proof of his own foolishness, delivered in front of the very audience he had spent his entire life trying to impress. He looked from the receipt to the bottle and back again, his mind finally, painfully connecting the dots. He wasn't just wrong. He was a fraud, and everyone knew it. He opened his mouth, but what came out wasn't words. It was just a raw, incoherent scream of pure, concentrated fury. He started yelling about me, about the wine, about his own humiliation, just a torrent of furious, meaningless noise. And as the party descended into absolute chaos, Sarah and I made a very quiet and very swift exit. We slipped out the door while Julian was still in mid-meltdown. We didn't say a word as we walked to the car, the sounds of his incoherent yelling slowly fading behind us. We got in, I started the engine, and we just sat there for a full minute. The only sound was the low hum of the car and the ringing in my ears. I looked over at Sarah. She was just staring straight ahead, her face pale, her expression completely unreadable. I had no idea what she was thinking. Was she furious with me? Devastated for her brother? Was our own relationship the next casualty of the night? And then she made a sound. It was a small sound at first. A little snort. A choked, stifled giggle that she tried to swallow. Her shoulders started to shake. I thought she was crying. But then the giggle escaped again, louder this time. And then it just erupted. She threw her head back and started to laugh. A full, deep, and completely unrestrained laugh of pure, cathartic relief. She laughed so hard she started to cry, great, rolling tears of mirth streaming down her face. I just stared at her, stunned. "Oh my God," she finally gasped, wiping the tears from her eyes with the back of her hand. "Oh my God, I'm sorry, I shouldn't be laughing, but..." His face. She broke down into another fit of giggles. "He was talking about the robust mouthfeel," she sputtered, barely able to get the words out. "The sublime finish of a $10 bottle of wine with a cartoon on the label." And then I started laughing too. All the tension, all the anger, all the drama of the last few months just dissolved in that shared, ridiculous moment. "You know," she said, her laughter finally subsiding into a wide, genuine smile as she looked at me. "He completely, 100% deserved that." In that moment, she wasn't Julian's sister anymore. She was my wife. She had finally, truly seen her brother's arrogance for what it was, and she had chosen a side. She had chosen my side. And as I put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb, I knew that whatever happened next, we would face it together. The revenge was sweet, but the real victory was her. And as it turned out, the story of Julian's birthday party would go on to create a whole new family vintage. The story of Julian's birthday party, or as it came to be known, the viniculture incident, became the stuff of family legend. It was retold at every subsequent holiday, every barbecue, every gathering. My father-in-law, who had witnessed Julian's arrogance for years, now took a special sadistic glee in asking him to recommend a good supermarket vintage. Julian, to his credit, was forced into a period of deep, and I think genuine humility. He didn't talk about wine for a solid year. He stopped using the word terroir entirely. He was quieter at family dinners, less condescending, more human. The ego correction, as I had called it, had worked better than I could have ever imagined. The real turning point came at Thanksgiving, almost a year later. The house was noisy and full of family. I was in the kitchen, grabbing a beer from the cooler, when Julian walked in. He didn't look at me at first. He just grabbed a beer for himself, and we stood there for a moment in an awkward, but not unfriendly silence. "Hey," he said finally, his eyes fixed on the label of his beer bottle. "That thing at Christmas last year? That was a jerk move. I'm sorry, it was a clumsy apology. Awkward, a little mumbled, but it was sincere. I could hear it in his voice. It's okay, man," I said, and I meant it. "We're good." I gave him a light pat on the shoulder, and that was it. The war was over. The Cold War, the hot war, all of it. We had found a new and much healthier peace. Later that night, after everyone had left, Sarah and I were cleaning up the kitchen. She pulled a bottle of wine out of the fridge. It was a familiar bottle, the one with the cartoon vineyard on the label. She poured 2 glasses, a wide, mischievous grin on her face. She handed one to me. "A little vintner's reserve to end the evening?" she asked, her eyes sparkling. I took the glass and swirled it, holding it up to the light with a serious, thoughtful expression. I took a small sip, letting it rest on my palate. I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. "It's remarkable, really. I'm getting strong notes of sweet, sweet justice."